Sometimes faith is not about seeing God do the wonderful. It's about us courageously obeying in the very, very difficult, the intolerable situations. I want you to think about Abraham. God calls him and tells him to sacrifice his son, his only son, the son that he and Sarah have waited years and years and years to receive miraculously, the son who was to be the son of the promise, the son in whom everything God had ever promised Abraham, all of it hung on the son, Isaac. And God said, I want you to sacrifice him to me. Well, in Hebrews chapter 11, this is what it says. By faith, Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac. He obeyed. He obeyed in the face of the impossible. Courageous obedience by faith. And sometimes that's what God's calling us to do. How did he do it? How is he capable of doing this? It goes on and says, and he who had received the promises offered up his only son, of whom it is said, in Isaac your seed shall be called. How did he do it? Verse 19, Hebrews 11, concluding that God was able to raise him up even from the dead. He had faith. He had faith that God was able. God was worth it. Another example is Moses. Moses, you know the story. He ended up being raised as an Egyptian. He ended up in Pharaoh's family. He ended up being one of Pharaoh's sons. In fact, grandsons. In fact, he ended up being possibly in line to become the next Pharaoh. But when he was 40 years old, he realized that he was Jewish and the Jewish people were being horribly treated as slaves by the Egyptians. So he stood up against the Egyptians. And it says in Hebrews 11:24, by faith Moses, when he became of age, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to suffer affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the passing pleasures of sin, esteeming the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures in Egypt. For he looked to the reward. By faith he forsook Egypt, not fearing the wrath of the king, for he endured as seeing him who is invisible. He put his eyes on God and realized, you know what? Sometimes God calls us to hard, difficult, painful, sacrificial, costly, courageous obedience, and God's worth it. What's the hard thing God's calling you to do by faith? Is it to forgive somebody that's hurt you? Is it to give your money to somebody who needs it, who's poor? Is it to step out in faith and start a new ministry or start a new church? What's the courageous, hard, difficult thing? Is it to love somebody who's just impossible to love? God's calling you today, courageous obedience in the face of the impossible. And He'll give you the grace to do it if you keep your eyes focused on Him and realize God's able and God's worth it.